You don't say, Nick. Then I see COLAUs. I bet you rape your dead sister's dog while videotaping movies in a cinema with a camera, you pirate asshole. Alright, Nickolaus, then, can you tell me why, out of all the clubs, in all the cities in the world, you had to haunt the toilets of this one? He hesitated for a minute or so, then his ghostly shoulders slumped in shame. I was a controversial and conservative author, and I was always afraid that if my fans found out about my secret desires they'd abandon me. So all I could ever do was stand in the alley outside watching people come in here wishing I could join them, so eventually I died regretting that I'd never known the hot sweaty pleasures of gay sex, and then I woke up here. I see. Do you think that if I could arrange for you to finally taste the forbidden fruit you would move on to the next world? Of course, you cocksucker. Only when I'm running late with the rent, Nickolaus, I said with a smile on my face. Give me a little while to work out the details and we'll soon get you to your final destination. Backing out of the toilet, I already had a plan formulating in my head. It was going to be expensive and painful, having to deal with a lifetime of repressed lust in a few hours always was. But Babs had said whatever it takes, and as long as my bar tag was cleared I'd survive the aftermath. Babs, pass me your mobile. Nicky, he said, a look of frustration on his face. When are you going to get your own mobile? It's 2008, darling. Everyone knows the government tracks you through them and credit cards. I'd rather stay off the grid as much as possible. He chuckled as he threw me the phone. Whatever you say, darling. So who you gonna call? Not who you're thinking about, I said with a wink while dialing. Our little friend in there has a lifetime of regrets from being stuck in the closet, and we have to burn through it all in a single afternoon. We need the sisters. Babs raised a querulous eyebrow. I told you it might be expensive, but if you can't think of a better option than having him possess me and live out his fantasy, then I'm all ears. It's my body that'll have to live with the aftermath after all. I could tell by the look on Babs's face that he was all out of ideas. I quickly explained the problem to the sisters after they picked up, and while they were skeptical they were also curious and professional enough to take the job anyway. Now odds are, dear reader, you've never heard of the sisters, and why should you? As two of the premier gay dominators in America, they don't advertise in city magazines or phone booths. The only way to get a hold of their number is to have a friend who knows it, or to have done them a favor once. I spent a nervous half-hour pacing back and forward in that bathroom waiting for Pain and Pleasure to arrive, and when they finally swanned in with their professional gear I was almost ready to call it off and try and blackmail the priest. Pain and Pleasure are more than just professional names, it's their work ethic as well. They believe that only through contrast can the purest responses be obtained, thus for every pain and torment there is an equal pleasure. Though of course people always get their names wrong. Pain is the thin young man in a mix of leather and feathers who looks as though he would never hurt a fly but knows exactly how to make a man scream for an hour and never leave a single mark. While Pleasure is the giant mute in a gimp mask with the burnt scars on his arms whose gentle touch earned him a role as Oprah's personal masseuse, before he met Pain. So Nickolaus, my little sunflower, Pain said with a sardonic smile on his face, where is this ghost client you have for us? Pleasure is simply dying to meet him. I pointed wordlessly towards the toilet cubicle where our spectral visitor had taken up residence, and watched as both of them swung the door open to peer inside. After a few seconds they closed the door and Pain turned to face me with a look of amusement. Well, Nickolaus, you never fail to surprise us, he said, but how do you expect us to work on a client with no flesh to touch, no nerves to stimulate, no orifices to pleasure? Possession, I replied. I'll let the dwarf take over my body and then the two of you will go to work on me, but he'll feel everything as well, so once he's had enough he'll move on and I'll spend the next day in a bath of ice with a bottle of whiskey. Very well, he nodded slowly. Go and assimilate our incorporeal friend, and I promise you that this will be our masterpiece. Not exactly reassuring, as I would be the one having to deal with the aftermath, but like I said, you do whatever it takes to close a case. I ventured once more into the cubicle to explain what was happening to our unfriendly ghost. Hey, Nickolaus, who were those two faggots? He interrupted before I could even finish my sentence. Masking my irritation at his homophobia, surely the tragic side effect of years spent in the closet, I began to go through the details of our plan. Those faggots, as you called them, are here to help you experience all the homosexual pleasure you dreamed of your entire life so you can finally move on. But how the fuck can they do that? I don't have a fucking body, you dumb shitator. I counted to 10 under my breath, reminding myself with each digit that this was really for Babs and not the little turd floating before me. That's where I come in, Nickolaus. You're going to possess my body and then they'll give you the time of your afterlife. I'm not sure I can't do that, and besides, isn't it a little gay? Don't you have a woman I can possess instead? I stared at him dumbfounded. Surely he couldn't be this stupid. Nickolaus, you spent most of your life dreaming about cock. After you died you wanted it so badly you wound up haunting the toilets of a gay club. I think it's a little late to be worrying about doing something gay, don't you? Now let's get on with this. Muttering about what an asshole I was, he still acquiesced, realizing that this might be his only chance to live his unfulfilled dream. He reached out his hand and touched mine, and I watched in horror and awe as I felt his ectoplasmic essence begin to flow into my pores, making them tingle before turning them numb. The feeling that slowly spread up through my arm and throughout my body until I couldn't move and everything seemed to be covered in a milky haze. "All right," Nickolaus said as he swung open the cubicle door, and it was bizarre to hear his squeaky voice overlaid on my deep rich tones, like some bizarre mixtape. "Let's get started, you fuckers." And they did. Oh Lord, they did. For the next 4 hours we went through every pain and pleasure you could imagine from two dedicated dominators with a varied selection of tools. After each one I prayed that this would be enough, but Nicky the Ghost's appetite was insatiable and he demanded more and more bizarre and twisted acts as the time went on. Even with the numbness of possession I could still feel most of what he was experiencing. The sisters were just that good. Finally Kane called a stop, and it was the first time I'd ever seen him covered in sweat with his hair mussed up while pleasure was wheezing like an asthmatic kid running a marathon. "Nickolaus, my dear fellow," he said, "I'm ashamed to admit it, but for the first time in my career I'm at a loss. Is there anything else we can do for you to help you pass on?" Well, there was this thing I'd read about with a gerbil. And sharing his mind I could see exactly what perverse act he intended to commit, and with my gerbil no less. I know I'd said whatever it takes, but this was one step too far, and with a titanic effort of will I reclaimed my body and vomited his ectoplasmic form out onto the bathroom floor where it mingled with the sweat, tears and semen from the previous 4 hours. "You leave Mr. Chim alone, you sick little troll." I could feel everyone looking at me in shock as it seemed that I'd just wasted the past 4 hours, but after sharing Nicky's mind I knew exactly what would finally get rid of him for good: the truth. "What the fuck are you doing, you faggot? So shut up, you homophobic little shit. I know everything, Mr. Controversial Author. The only person who didn't regret publishing your crap was you. Even your family had trouble finding nice things to say about it. And as for never having experienced gay love, remember your visit to Poe's grave? Yeah, I thought you did. Newsflash, dumpling. Having another man's cock rammed into your esophagus counts as gay sex." I stared at the flummoxed little ghost who seemed to be growing smaller and smaller with each job. "You're so pathetic that even as a ghost you could only make it into the toilets in a place like this. Now you're going to get the hell out, or I'll read every last page of the goddamn Twilight series to you and do the voices. So I'm such a special flower of the whiny, clumsy teenage girl that despite my angst every man wants me. I tried to stay away from you for your own safety, because even though I love you for some reason, I'm a vampire and want to have you for lunch. Now watch me sparkle." That seemed to be the last straw as Nicky collapsed inwards until he was little more than a pinprick of ectoplasm floating in the air that finally imploded with a little popping sound and a final faint whine about how I was a shy-tating plagiarist who never had an original idea in my life that quickly dissipated into nothingness, taking him and his stench away never to return. Babs looked at me with a raised eyebrow while pain for once was as speechless as pleasure. "Really, Nicky, Twilight?" Babs said, "I don't think that's recommended for use in exorcisms." "Well, Babs, if there's one thing a sex detective knows, it's that you do whatever it takes, even if it means going through the depressing realization that all the good guys are straight fictional queer wolves. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to crawl into a tub of ice and forget this ever happened." And that was how I closed the case of the Spectre of the Exile. I'd like to say that was my only brush with the supernatural, but then I'd be lying, and if there's one thing a sex detective never does, it's lie. The end.